Professor. This entire conversation appears to be revolving around a relationship with Israel. After Israel, the United States donates more money to Egypt than any other country, and we're also talking about Egypt. When talking about Israel's decisions about how to relate to its neighbors, you're talking about the demographic problem, and you were talking about the blockade of the wall, and also our blockade of the Gaza Strip. However, the blockade of the Gaza Strip is impossible without Egypt's help. And I believe that's why we give money to Egypt, and that's why we back Mubarak, to protect Israel and to allow them to defend their demographic situation. My question is, what is it that's compelling us to do such acts for Israel? Like, what is it that we're so interested in? Is it about the oil?
What's the source of U.S. support? You're perfectly right. I mean,
one of the reasons the U.S. and Israel were upset about the threat to Mubarak was that he was cooperating in the strangulation of the Gaza Strip. That's only one part of it. His agreement, there was a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel in 1979. There's a long history of that, but the effect of the treaty was understood right away. It freed Israel up to carry out aggressive actions elsewhere. So you read Israeli strategic analysts, say Avner Yaniv, right in 1980. He said, okay, now Israel's free. We don't have any threat from Egypt, so therefore we're free to attack Lebanon, say, which they did. Right after that was their big invasion of Lebanon. And it's sort of been kept that way. So if Egypt did have a democratic uprising, succeeded, almost certainly that arrangement wouldn't remain, or at least would reduce in character, and then Israel would be forced to deploy forces in the southern region and so on. So why is the U.S. supporting Israel? Well, that's a very interesting question. And if you look closely, you can find reasons. So just ask yourself for a minute, where is the strongest support coming from? So take, say, the press. I mean, the most rabid pro-Israel newspaper is the Wall Street Journal. Now, the Wall Street Journal is not part of the lobby. It's the newspaper of the business world. The Republicans are far more extreme in support of Israeli expansion and atrocities than the Democrats. Jewish votes and Jewish money tend to go to the Democrats. But again, the Republicans are the business party. I mean, they're so deep in the pockets of corporate America, you need a telescope to find them. That's what they are. And so they're strongly supportive of Israel. If you look at the business community at large, you see pretty much the same thing. They think Israel's fine. So U.S. investment in high-tech industry in Israel keeps going up. Intel, major chip producer in the world, has a new generation of chips coming out that they say they think will take over the world market. Now, their main factory they're building right now is in Israel. They have a military industry. For them, Israel's a bonanza. So say take Lockheed Martin. When the United States essentially gives Israel the F-35s, that's a huge boost for Lockheed Martin. But remember, it's a double boost, because when the U.S. gives arms to Israel, that's what's called in retail marketing a teaser. What it means is that Saudi Arabia, which has all the money, they're going to come along and say, we want something like that too. And then the U.S. can send second-rate arms, which they can't use anyway, to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And in fact, Obama just made he's $3 billion to Israel, but he just made a $60 billion deal with Saudi Arabia. Well, that's for a long time been the way in which the U.S., and to a lesser degree Britain, recycle petrodollars, keep military industry functioning, and so on. So they love it. And they're a big lobby, they're very powerful. U.S. military and intelligence have had pretty close relations with Israel since the 50s and maintain them. Apart from all these kind of concrete bases of support, there are kind of cultural issues which I don't think should be dismissed. So the U.S., I don't have to tell you, is an unusually religious country. It's kind of off the spectrum, international spectrum in religious belief. And it's not just evangelicals, that's elites. It's elites too. And in fact, Christian Zionism, both in Britain and the United States, goes back way before Jewish Zionism. It goes back to the 19th century before the Jewish Zionist movement even took off. And it's quite real. So for example, during the First World War, when British General Allenby conquered Jerusalem from the Turks, you just take a look at the headlines in the mainstream U.S. and British press. General Allenby was Richard the Lionhearted, literally, rescuing the Holy Land from the infidels. In other words, he was winning the War of the Crusades, finally. Huge cheers, Well, the next thing, after we get the Holy Land back from the infidels, is you have to follow the words of the Bible. Well, the Lord, to be precise, the war god, that's who the Lord of the Old Testament is, the war god promised the land of Israel to the Jews. So we got to bring the Jews back. That's fulfilling God's will. You go on to say the Roosevelt administration, secular administration, but one of Roosevelt's main advisors, Harold Ickes, who's secular, of course, said that the return of Jews to Palestine then is I think the greatest achievement in human history. He said something like that. And this goes all the way to the present. It's an extremely religious country. It extends over much of the population. People like Woodrow Wilson and Harry Truman, they're reading the Bible every day. And the Bible tells you things, like it tells you it's our holy land, doesn't belong to the infidels, they don't belong there, and the Jews have to go back. And then if you go way off to the Christian right, and you get into the revivalist movement, okay, then there's more things happening. Like that movement actually really took off in 1948. The Jews were back in Palestine. You go to now Israel. You go to the Book of Revelations. It goes on until you have Armageddon, and everybody slaughters each other, which is wonderful because the souls that are saved rise to heaven, including incidentally 144,000 Jews for some reason. But the rest are eternal damnation. So we've got to press this. And this again is not strange preachers in Texas. Now, this is right in the White House. So for example, take say George W. Bush. Well, it hasn't been discussed much, but when Bush was trying to get international support for the invasion of Iraq, we're now talking about January 2003, he met with the president of France, Chirac, and we sort of have the documents from the French side, but Bush apparently started ranting about some extremely obscure passage in the book of Ezekiel. It's about Gog and Magog, and nobody knows what it means. I mean, are they people, are they places, whatever it is. But according to this passage, Gog and Magog come down and destroy Israel, and then comes Armageddon and all kind of things. Chirac had no idea what he was talking about. So he asked the French Foreign Office, the Élysée, if they could explain to him what this maniac is raving about. And they didn't know. So they contacted a Belgian theologian. Actually, that's how I found out about it. The Belgian theologian sent me a copy of a disquisition that he wrote to the French Foreign Office, explaining the interpretations of this obscure passage and its role in, Christian right, fantasies. This isn't the White House. I mean, that stuff is not insignificant. And there are other things, too. The United States, remember, is a settler colonial society. the whole so-called Anglosphere, the expansion of England, is settler colonial imperialism. The United States, Canada, Australia. Now, that's the most vicious form of imperialism because it means wiping out the indigenous population. The French sort of was the same in Algeria, but most imperialism wasn't that way. It's the Anglosphere, which is typically settler colonial. And that's deep in our history. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid, we were playing cowboys and Indians, and we were the cowboys killing the Indians. I think it's a little better these days. But this is really deep in the culture. It's a settler colonial society. We belong here, they don't. They were, all kinds of stories about how they didn't really have any right to the land and should be. It's right through the most elite literature. It's not crazy stuff, and that's just part of general consciousness. And you take a look at Israel. That's what it is: settler colonial society. It's an advanced culture of Europeans coming into this land, eliminating the barbarians who don't belong there in the first place, and there's a kind of a natural sympathy that develops. I mean, I think all of these are factors that shouldn't be ignored. How deep they are is another question, but you could have said the same with South Africa. In fact, it was true in South Africa. There was a very natural association. South Africa is another settler colonial society. And there's a natural kind of sympathy in white America with white nationalist racism. It was real, and nevertheless, the U.S. did change policy.